We have two plenary sessions left this afternoon. We'll have to keep strict military discipline in order to be able to conclude sharply at 17:30, because I know some people have bilaterals whose times they cannot change, and a few of us have an early commitment for reception and dinner for which we absolutely cannot be late. So I shall try to restore a perfect sense of punctuality to our proceedings. We're starting actually only 10 minutes late, which isn't bad given that the geographies we'd have to cover and the many movements of both ministers and senior officials that we've been managing. We had a tremendous introduction this morning to a lot of these themes. This afternoon gives us a chance to look at a couple of them, not just in more detail, but from a slightly different perspective. Managing conflict and stabilization in the Middle East is not a responsibility that falls only on the immediately local powers, but also on interested states from outside who bring different skill sets and political perspectives to that task, but we all hope a common objective to have it advanced. And that is why we have three individuals in this first session that can give us different perspectives from countries that have differing policies towards the regions and different definitions of their national interests, but for collective action to be effective, for multiple action to actually be coordinated, for conflict not to be advanced by inadvertent diplomatic or military moves. It is important to have these perspectives understood and the opportunity for people here informally to share their views. Sedat Onal is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, but has been long, in the bureaucratic phrase, seized of these matters in the immediate region, and can speak with great authority on Turkey's interests and role in the region and how it will hope to advance the task of stabilization. Niels Annen is the Minister of State of the Auswärtiges in Germany. I'm delighted to say that the IISS has developed a very strong relationship with the Auswärtiges Amt and conducted a number of projects. Most recently, we held a missile proliferation initiative workshop in Berlin, the first of three that we are executing with the generous support of the Auswärtiges Amt, and which was opened by the Foreign Minister of Germany, and we hope to have other iterations over the next couple of years. And there's an awful lot of other work we've done with our friends in Germany, including sort of relevant to the contemporary European defense and security debate, quite a specialist study we did on the cost of European strategic autonomy. In Europe, there's been a lot of talk about European strategic autonomy. Most has been centered on institutional sovereignty questions, who runs what, and what badges are put on what missions. Our goal in this study, which was animated by a request from the Auswärtiges Amt, was to look at what the actual capability gaps were in Europe if by some chance the United States weren't willing to contribute to a particular operation, and the call sign of European strategic autonomy was actually asked to be delivered, and we assessed on a very modest Article 5 scenario that some 357 billion euros would have to be spent over a 10 to 15 year period in order to assure that those capability gaps were closed. And so we actually thank the Auswärtiges Amt for asking us to answer the question, because it's important sometimes to be provoked by the curiosity of governments into doing the sort of original research to which we aspire. I'm really delighted to also having on this plenary Ling Chengwon, who's the ambassador for China Arab States Cooperation Forum Affairs, He's been an ambassador to a number of Middle East countries and Arab states, and he will do all of you the honor when he does speak to address this audience in Arabic. So do reach for your headphones if, unlike him and some of us, you're not fluent in Arabic. In April 2019, had an excellent, nearly 1 hour long bilateral with State Councillor and Minister of Foreign Affairs Wang Yi, and spoke to him not only about the importance of the IISS Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, which this year was addressed in a very authoritative manner by State Councillor and Defense Minister Wei Fenghe, but also the importance given China's relationship with this region of China becoming also strongly involved in the IISS Manama dialogue, and the special envoy's role here is a manifestation of Wang Yi's commitment to strengthen China's relationship with this Manama dialogue process. So with that introduction, it gives me great pleasure to invite Sedat Onal to address this fourth plenary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chipman. And I would like to first start by thanking our hosts, Kingdom of Bahrain. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to this audience. In my speech, I would like to focus especially on our Syria policy, which is a focus of attention, especially after the Operation Peace Spring, to which reference have been made in the previous panels. So I would like to set the record straight and to clarify some misinformation and some disinformation about this operation as well as our policy in Syria. But before doing so, I would like to share some observations about the conflicts and crises in the region and their possible reasons. You know, especially in countries like Syria, from the very beginning we have had greater participation of international community. At a certain time, for example, we had Friends of Syria group which numbered more than 60 countries. Now all that we have is two groups. One is Astana platform, the other is so-called small group. They are trying to bring about added value, especially to efforts to come up with a resolution of the crisis in Syria. I don't want to go into detail and history of things, but I would like to share a few observations. To my mind, the incompatibility of the objectives set and the tools employed. In other words, the mismatch between rhetoric and action on the ground on the part of the international community has partly been the reason why this crisis has perpetuated itself and transformed into a bigger problem. When we look at the root causes of these instability that we have seen in several countries, starting with this so-called Arab Spring, what is obvious is the existence of grievances of the people, whether about lack of jobs, economic opportunity, lack of economic opportunity, inequality, their aspirations for greater say in political decision-making process that affects them, or about lack of good governance. And we have also started seeing in some other countries, now in Iraq, also in Lebanon, or we can also talk about the situation in Latin America. Mostly these are about grievances for public services, lack of good governance, and things like this. However, These aspirations have to be expressed in a peaceful manner, and solutions to these grievances should be sought in a sense of national and regional ownership first, with due regard to specificities of each and every case, because each and every country has their own special, particular socio-economic backgrounds. So the ways to address these grievances might change in accordance with the country concerned. And we should bear in mind that there is no panacea nor one-size-fits-all kind of solutions that we could really apply to regional problems. As it was referred to in previous panels, these solutions should first and foremost be homegrown. Again, while addressing these problems, zero-sum perceptions or attempts at creating regional balance of power on polarization or confrontation, nor application of overwhelming sanctions will work. It has been proved in the past, in recent history, that such sanctions, overwhelming sanctions, will first and foremost harm the people and prove to be counterproductive. So as Turkey, what we suggest and support is engagement and meeting at the common denominators, even this is at the minimum, maximum level. This should be given priority. Because security is indivisible, efforts at improving overall security in the region should also be inclusive and all-encompassing. As to efforts for, and from here I would like to pass to the issue of Syria, as to conflict resolution methods, our engagement in Astana platform provides a unique example in many ways. Because Astana is a platform that brings together parties that actually support two different sides in Syria. For Turkey, from the very beginning, from the times of Friends of Syria group all the way to today, we have been supporting the opposition, which we see as the representative of aspirations of the people. As to Russia and Iran, they support the Syrian regime. But at the same time, we agree with them on certain departure points. For one, the need to protect territorial integrity and political unity of the country. Second, the impossibility of having a military solution to the crisis on the ground. And third, combating terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. And these 3 points have always been reflected in the joint communique that we agreed with them. Astana format has been criticized by certain friends of us in the West, but it has until now brought added value to the efforts under the aegis of United Nations and United Nations Special Envoy in Geneva. If the Syrian regime is engaged and accepted to sit at the table, at the same table with the opposition, and get involved to the political negotiation process in line with UN Resolution 2254, to a large extent it was because of the work within Astana context. So I think this unique example has to be repeated elsewhere, because when you try to solve problems from a very categorical point of view, we will have no chance for success. At the end of the day, by definition in diplomacy, it takes compromise. And without compromising basic principles such as unity of the country's territorial integrity, we should be able to come together between parties who may not agree on each and everything. And this is actually what the diplomacy is about. As to Turkish policy on Syria, it has several dimensions. Again, there was a reference to the involvement of Turkey in Astana process, and it was kind of questioned. You know, Turkey has longest border with Syria, 910 kilometers. We are the ones who feel the immediate, direct negative effects of what's happening in countries like Syria and Iraq. In Turkey now, the Syrian refugees number about 3.6 million. Up to now, it's now in the 9th year, up to now, we have spent from our national budget about $40 billion for the accommodation, provision of food, shelter, education, healthcare to the Syrian refugees. In Turkey alone, almost 500,000 Syrian children were born. So it's our responsibility to take after them. So it is only natural for Turkey to be part and parcel of each and every effort which aimed to find a viable, durable resolution of the conflict in Syria. And over time, because of reasons I mentioned, the crisis in Syria has also become one of a national security issue for Turkey because of the situation on the border area. Again, there was a reference, especially within NATO context, about the Turkish operation in the previous panels. I am also going to clarify it. We are, of course, one of the most important staunch members of NATO, and we are committed to our responsibilities within NATO, and we have been taking responsibilities in many places, including Afghanistan, in Europe, elsewhere. But in terms of the solidarity between and among allies, in the same context, we expect our allies to display same solidarity for us. When reference is made to Turkish operation in Syria, we see that such comments as the abandonment of a local ally for a NATO member, Turkey. If we exercise some empathy from our side, the picture is seen as the abandonment of a NATO ally, time-tested NATO ally, for a transactional partner that has been created out of a terrorist entity. So the situation for Turkey is the agenda and advancement of this agenda, even by the support of our allies, of a terrorist entity which aims to, at the minimum, to create a statelate within Syria and also pose a national security threat to Turkey, and from this area to launch acts of terrorism to Turkey. This is Turkish part of the story. So again, there were some references to this operation from the Arab perspective, saying that this is an operation against territorial unity and integrity of an Arab country, so they are standing against this operation. From our perspective, what we have done is actually helped preserve national unity of the country. We are not there for permanently. This is a temporary existence. What we are trying to do is to address and disrupt a terrorist agenda and to open the way for political process with legitimate participation of all segments of the society as well. So from here, I also would like to say a few words on the political process, which with the formation of the Constitutional Committee gained ground. Now they are going to have their second tour in Geneva. And as Turkey, we will be supporting this. We have tried very hard with other partners in terms of bringing together this committee, and we will be working with the UN Special Envoy, Mr. Patterson, in this regard. So I am going to finish my words here. One last thing about, of course, if we talk about the region and stability, we should also make a reference to the issue of Palestine. I would say that I associate myself fully with what our friend and colleague, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Jordan said, as to the erosion of established parameters of a two-state solution and its negative implication for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I know that there will be a lot of discussion following your comments on the issue of Syria and Turkey's engagement there. So I want to thank you very much for properly introducing this topic in our session. I want to remind everybody that if they want to participate in the debate, they have to engage in that two-step process of putting their badge into the microphone and pressing the button. And when your microphone light comes on, don't be fearful. It doesn't mean your microphone is yet on. I will turn it on from here, but do join the queue if you like. And with that, it's a real pleasure to ask Niels Annen, Minister of State of the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, to address this plenary. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you indeed very, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first participation at the Manama dialogue. I also like to thank my Turkish colleague. I wanted to make a reference to the Kurdish-dominated part of northeastern Syria, and I was going to do that, but also wanted to tell you something about the stabilization policies that Germany has been undertaking, and I hope that we have an opportunity in the discussion. But with all due respect, Mr. Deputy Minister, I believe that what you said, it's a necessary contribution to a dialogue among friends and a necessary discussion that we need to have among allies within NATO, but also within the counter-Daesh coalition, which has been so extraordinarily successful. And I think that the German position is well known, it's well clear. We regard that operation as not in accordance with international law. And I believe that although we agree in the aim of defending the territorial integrity of Syria, that invading a part of that very country is not necessarily a contribution to achieve that goal. But the real concern that we are having, and we have been talking about this before, is that that operation has consequences for the power balance within Syria. We see the Assad regime strengthening right now, also at the table in Geneva. And we already saw before that crisis erupted a resurgence of ISIS structures, not only in Iraq but also in Syria. So that is not really a contribution to maintain the successful military success of the counter-Daesh operation, and I really hope that this kind of open exchange will also contribute to what we all need to do, and that is to continue working and tackling the root causes of those ISIS terrorists. And we know that you can defeat a so-called caliphate, but not militarily defeat an ideology which is still there. So that is also one of the reasons why Germany, ladies and gentlemen, remains engaged in the stabilization efforts in both countries. And I do believe that this is very important, because we know that at the end of the day, a process needs to have a political conclusion. Peace, if I may say so, needs to come from within. So when we talk about managing conflicts in the Middle East, I firmly believe the managers must be largely regional in order to ensure that a country's future is shaped by and in the interest of the population in question. After long phases of conflict and war, it might seem impossible for some sections of the population to rebuild their lives there. We all need a certain level of security to flourish. Nobody, ladies and gentlemen, can live in constant fear of physical or mental harm. As international partners, we can try to show people that laying down their arms and committing to dialogue will eventually pay off. The clear benefits of engaging in a peaceful and constructive political process have to become apparent and palpable to the population. This is what stabilization can help to achieve. We call it the peace dividend. Ladies and gentlemen, Germany hardly ever works on its own. We are, as I hope you all know, multilateralists. For us, it's self-evident that we have to embed our stabilization efforts in an international framework. We work with many of you in the room, the United Nations, the EU, the World Bank, our allies here in the region, close friends and partners. And there are many examples which show that stabilization is most effective when based upon firm multilateral grounds. I will focus very briefly on two, Iraq and Yemen. In Iraq, together with the Iraqi government and our international partners, we have come indeed a long way since 2014. All the initiatives we are supporting are aimed at making the benefits of political engagement visible to the population and supporting local authorities in their efforts to increase efficiency and confidence. In order to do so, we have provided the UNDP funding facility for stabilization in Iraq with more than 270 million euros since 2014. The purpose of the FFS is to rebuild critical infrastructure. This should, in turn, enable Iraqis who fled Daesh to return to their homes. And second, we are also supporting the community policing program in Iraq implemented by IOM. In this project, Iraqi communities and the police get together to establish local community police forces. And third, we are supporting the clearing of mines and improvised explosive device via UNMAS in order to make people's home and their environment safe again. And we all know how sophisticated that ISIS operations have been. To date, 4.46 million internally displaced Iraqis have been able to return to their homes. This is a success. And it's a good example of what we can achieve when international and local efforts go hand in hand. Yet I know about the difficult situation in Iraq, and it's all the more a motivation for us to continue working on this, and also a reminder that stabilization cannot replace neither politics nor diplomacy. And briefly to Yemen, we've been witnessing the worst humanitarian crisis in decades. The only way to resolve this terrible conflict is by political means. That is why Germany actively and wholeheartedly supports the efforts of Martin Griffiths to restart the peace process, a process that must be inclusive, involving all relevant political groups, and I see many friends here in the room who are working with us towards that aim. And we are following a comprehensive approach. We are supporting, as you may know, mediation efforts by bringing together Yemeni actors in track 2 dialogue consultations. And we are supporting the Peace Support Facility for Yemen in close cooperation with the United Nations. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's no coincidence that I have chosen to speak about Iraq. Stabilizing Mosul after its liberation was a textbook example of what can be achieved when all stars align. Military success by the Iraqi army, accompanied by a multilateral brokered political process, complemented by concrete projects to quickly, that is important, to quickly provide results for the local population, from demining, as I mentioned, and building functioning infrastructure, local administration. And nor is it a coincidence that I've chosen to speak about Yemen. It's not clear yet whether or not we can reach a political solution and find ways of stabilizing the peace process. I sincerely hope that Martin Griffiths' efforts are successful, but without a political will from all sides, we will fail. And still, referring back to the title of the plenary session, when it comes to managing conflicts in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world, for that matter, I'm convinced that a triad of steps is crucial. Specific conflict can only be solved by inclusive political process. Second, this process should be locally owned and, where needed, UN brokered. And third, it needs to be accompanied by tailored projects which make benefits of the chosen political path palpable to the local population. So let me end here, ladies and gentlemen. Most conflicts, we all know that, are complex. This sounds like a simple truth, but it's not. Crises that are limited to one country and can be resolved internally have become very rare. Regional dynamics and global antagonisms are dominating factors in the Middle East, and that dominates also our efforts to tackle these situations. And this is why traditional diplomacy and international partnerships have to play a major role in conflict resolution. Let me end one last thought from a perspective of my home country, Germany. As a region, Europe had been war-torn for centuries and devastated by 2 world wars in the 20th century, before our forefathers and mothers created a peace project that ended the violence for good and led to peace and prosperity and friendship. That should guide our activities, and I thank you very much for the invitation and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, and also for your strategic maxim that stabilization does not replace either politics or diplomacy. And you made reference to the classic diplomacy in which Germany engages in the interests of conflict resolution. And I might more widely advertise to this audience the rather understated convening power of Berlin and the ability of the Auswärtiges often to bring different parties involved in both Middle Eastern and African conflict quietly to talk in Berlin. And it's one of the reasons why this issue of conflict and stabilization is one that we want to examine not only in plenary but in special session tomorrow. And Rüdiger König, who worked for you as the Director General of Crisis Prevention, Stabilization, Peace Building and Humanitarian Assistance, tutored me very closely when I was last in Berlin and in his office on the really quite special efforts that you make quietly to bring people together, and I thought I would give that due and wider recognition. And with that, could I invite Li Chengwen, the Ambassador for China-Arab States Cooperation Forum Affairs, to take the podium and address this audience, and owing to his great familiarity with the region, he will do so in the Arabic language. Thank you, sir.
الضيوف الكرام السيدات
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a pleasure for me to be or to talk on behalf of the Chinese government and to congratulate you for the 15th Manama dialogue, and I would like also to thank the ISS as well as the Foreign Ministry in Bahrain for all the good organization of this event. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have lots of unprecedented changes since 100 years, and we can consider that the Palestinian issue is one of the long-lasting problems that have lots of repercussions on the area. So we cannot talk about a Middle East that is stable and living in peace without finding a solution to the issue of Palestine. This is why we need to stick to the two-state solution as well as the initiative, the Arab initiative, in order for us to have a Palestinian state that is fully sovereign based on 1967 with East Jerusalem as capital. In fact, China gives a lot of importance to this. In fact, the Minister of Foreign Affairs as well as the Prime Minister have launched a 3-point initiative in order to reduce the tensions in the Gulf area. In last September, the margins of the UN as General Assembly talks, and it has talked about the Iran nuclear deal and called everybody to go back to this good track, because keeping the JCPOA is the real road and the only road to calm the situation and to resume the balance between the rights and the obligations that are in this agreement that represent the minimum of the justice and equity. Consequently, all the concerned parties need to go back to this agreement and to live up to their commitments, and then to go back to an equal dialogue in order to solve the nuclear problem. Second, the Gulf states have called for dialogue and consultation, and this dialogue and consultation is a way that is very important for the good relations and for the achievement of the security and stability in the Gulf. We have an old saying that the welfare of your neighbor is your welfare. Consequently, the good neighborliness in this area requires lots of good intentions and less allegations. Consequently, we need to have dialogue and consultation in order to find a solution and consensus regarding some specific issues, including collaboration regarding the safe maritime navigation in the Gulf and the Hormuz Strait, and to remain within good neighborliness. Third, the states that are out of this region call for a positive role in order to strengthen the stability and the security of the area. Consequently, at the political level, the foreign countries need to commit to the pluralism and to justice and to support the role of the United Nations as the main road, and to call upon the Gulf states to dialogue amongst themselves. At the economic level, we need to work for prosperity through the collaboration and strengthening the interests, the common interests of everybody. And we welcome the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, in order to reach collaboration and gain a win-win, and to have a win-win situation. At the security level, we have to leave the mentality of the zero-sum game and not to resort to the military force in order for everybody to live in security. Next week, we will have in Beijing the Forum for the Middle East, where we will be discussing with all the stakeholders how to strengthen stability in the Middle East in order to have more contribution in order to solve the problems in the area. Ladies and gentlemen, safeguarding the world security and to have this community, the community of shared future for mankind, is a very important issue, and this shows the way how everybody wants to establish a good world. But in fact, there are some states that have their own agenda that are far from the good intention of China, and sometimes have false allegations against China, and this is something that we cannot accept. during the dinner yesterday, there was a kind of accusation that China's behavior has increased the tensions in the South China Sea. But in fact, since the issue is, here we're talking about the Middle East, but since this is something that is very important, a very important issue, it is very important for me to shed the light on this issue. In fact, China has the maritime rights on this South China Sea since very long ago. And recently, the situation in this sea has become very stable after being very unstable. So the issue of two tracks in order to solve the problem of the South China Sea is through finding a compromise amongst the stakeholders, and we have worked with the ASEAN together in order to safeguard the stability of the area. And currently, the discussions and consultations are going in order to see how we can have a code of ethics regarding this area, and we have a new roadmap regarding this issue. And China has given a 3 years period in order to reach a code of conduct. This means that this should be ready by 2021, which shows our good intention and our feeling of responsibility. While some other ASEAN countries started agreeing the Chinese initiative regarding these negotiations, and we consider that this code of conduct needs to become a kind of instrument that lives up to the needs of the area and organize the work, and namely the maritime navigation in the South China Sea. Consequently, it can play a very important role in order to strengthen the mutual trust, to manage cooperation, and to establish stability. This is why we will be working with the Asian countries to put an end to the tensions and to fasten the track of negotiations and to reach some consensus. Recently, the biggest challenge regarding the South China Sea is something that some of the foreign forces do not want to see. So they do not want to see stability in this area, and they are trying to confuse people and to wreak havoc in the area. They are sending their aircrafts and their ships to this area in order to in a show of strength, and this is the biggest confusion and the biggest threat for peace and stability in this area. China does not want to have any hegemony. It does not have any ambition of aggression nor of hegemony. Now, regarding the areas in the Eastern Sea, we will not waive our rights to these territories, and we will not take any territories from any other countries. This is why we refuse this accusation by the Minister of Defense from Japan. So we completely refuse this allegation or this accusation regarding the South China Sea. Consequently, we will assume our responsibility in front of our people in China, and we will work for the international rule of law. This is our position. We welcome, of course, the good intention efforts, but we refuse any intervention. And this is why we are ready to give lots of contributions in order to safeguard the security, the stability, and the development of the area. Thank you very much.
Shishi. Many thanks. Well, I think what we've heard today is one of the reasons why the Manama dialogue is a successful instrument. Sharply differing points of view, but politely delivered and firmly stated on some issues between the representative from Germany and the representative from Turkey. And sharply different views, but firmly and politely stated from the representative of the People's Republic of China, referring to remarks given at the opening dinner last night. And I receive with warmth your comments, and would only want to say before we open up the conversation to general discussion that were a code of conduct to be agreed between all the regional powers in Asia, and that retained the rights of international states peacefully to operate in the region, I think everybody would be extremely pleased, and we all support the efforts of those who are working towards a code of conduct that it gives everyone the rights that they properly deserve in the region. So thank you very much for your clarifications of your national position, and we look forward to hearing more about this issue in 6 months' time at the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue, but I hope in the next 25 minutes that we can have a robust conversation about the immediate issues of conflict and stabilization in the Middle East, and I'm glad that we have 6 or 7 people on the list, all with slightly different perspectives to deliver, and then I'll come back to the podium for their answers to those questions. But first, from the United Kingdom, General Jonathan Shaw.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a very interesting talk, particularly good to hear from China. On which perspective, a perspective that's not often heard and that we're not hearing today is from Russia. So I'd just like to introduce that perspective, if I may. Because 2 years ago I read a presentation by Rosneft in which they outlined what they proposed to be Russia's answer to how they approach the Eurasian century. And essentially it was to dominate the oil-producing countries of the region in order to supply the energy-consuming regions of West Europe and China, Southeast Asia. The importance of this strategy to me seems to be it gives a long-term coherence to what might otherwise be thought to be piecemeal Russian interventions in the region. And I just wonder what the panel might think of this plan and indeed of Russian activity since, and whether they think Russian involvement in the region is going to be constructive or destabilizing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Saudi Arabia, Malik Dalan.
Thank you for the wonderful presentations and tour de force. This question is for Ambassador Lee. I'm curious about your remark on the Belt and Road Initiative, and I've followed the 2015 vision and actions document as well as the second document on building the BRI. Most of it doesn't include any reference to a firm multilateral order, only bilateralism. And if the focus indeed is to bring, and one theme, including in President Xi's speeches, was harmony, which was mentioned several times. As a lawyer, harmony doesn't factor so much in my thinking, but I'm curious to hear how do you see a level of harmony when there is a direct conflict between China, or rather Iran and Saudi Arabia, Iran being someone that is supplying China now. And the second question is, what are China's interests right now in reconstruction efforts in Yemen and Syria? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deborah Haynes from the UK.
Thank you. This is a question for the German Minister Annan. Could you please just explain what Germany's proposal is for NATO in terms of this Council of Elders that Germany would like to see for NATO to sort of think about its political shape? And does that differ with what France is proposing? And do you agree with Minister Parley that there needs to be a pause to think, or isn't there a concern that a pause would be taken as an opportunity by opponents to act against NATO? And for the Turkish minister, please, it seems that obviously that a lot of NATO allies are angry by Turkey's action in Syria. Isn't it a fact that Turkey needs NATO more than NATO needs Turkey? And actually, you're going to have to change your policy in Syria and also change your policy with regards to the S-400 system that you're buying. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Nowens.
Thank you, John. My question is for Ambassador Lee. Ambassador, you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, and I'm interested in the role that it can play in stabilization, but particularly the digital Silk Road component of the Belt and Road Initiative. I'm wondering whether you can speak to the role of ICT technologies and whether they can help and hinder stabilization efforts in post-conflict countries, particularly surveillance technology.
Thank you. And from Saudi Arabia, Abdulaziz Al-Saga.
Thank you, John. My question addressed to the Chinese speakers, of course. Some analysts, they look at the Chinese threat perception based in 4 issues. 1, rate of exchange, level of growth, protectionism, and Pacific security. Those are 4 key issues for the Chinese security agenda. But looking today at the conflict between the US and China in terms of the trade war, how does he see his relation towards Saudi Arabia? And with that sort of a trade relation conflict, is that going to impact the China relation to the region? Because so far we have been forecasting the relation with China more of a buyer and seller relation rather than a strategic relation. We have not seen that strategic dimension in terms of the relation with this part of the Middle East. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Bastian Gigovic.
Thank you, John. I have a question for Minister of State Annan. Thank you very much for your remarks, Minister. You mentioned the central idea of the peace dividend in the German concept of stabilization, and the idea here being that conflicting parties are better off not fighting or stopping to fight than they would be if they continued. But I wonder whether you could say a bit more about where you think the military instrument fits in to that process and in the process of getting to that peace dividend. And I'm thinking in particular about Florence Parly's remarks this morning about a European maritime surveillance presence, which would certainly be a softer form of the military instrument. But I wonder where that fits into the concept of stabilization as you have outlined it. Thank you.
Pierre Noël.
Thank you very much, John. It's another question for Ambassador Lee. We heard earlier today from the minister from Japan how much the country, Japan's economic security was reliant, dependent on freedom of navigation here in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, this is very much true of China as well. So I would like to ask you, how does China contribute to the production of the public good of maritime security in the Middle East, and how will it contribute to the production of that public good in the future? Thank you.
And from Bahrain, Fatima Al-Saraifi.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. My question is addressed to the Turkish Foreign Minister. Although Turkey has asserted that its campaign is aimed at fighting terrorism in Syria, how would the Foreign Minister comment on how Turkey is being viewed as using ill-disciplined Syrian rebel groups to combat terrorism? Thank you.
Thank you. And also from Bahrain and the ISS, Hassan Al-Hassan.
Shukran, Sayyidi John.
Thank you, Mr. John Chipman. My question goes to the Chinese ambassador, since he has delivered his speech in Arabic, so I will be asking the question in Arabic. First, I would like to express my admiration because you speak Arabic, and literally Arabic, and this is rare. I would like to mention here the position of China vis-à-vis the latest attacks on the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. I think that I don't divulge a secret when I say that China relies a lot on the energy supplies, oil and gas from the Gulf. My question is the following. Does China believe that the protection of navigation in the Gulf is exclusively the responsibility of the United States, and consequently it is not directly linked to such an issue? My second question is the following. Why does China consider that the Iranian warnings to navigation from a sharp and a small perspective?
Thank you very much. And from Yemen, Abu Badr al-Khirbi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you will allow me to speak in Arabic just to see if I can compete with His Excellency the Chinese ambassador. Their speeches. وأود أيضا أن
I would like as well to thank the German Minister of State because he has talked about, she has given us the panorama and all the efforts that they have paid in Germany, and namely the issue regarding the issue of Yemen, especially that they have also called upon or tried to mediate amongst the different stakeholders there. So first of all, I would like to see how or with whom are you really negotiating in order to find an integrated solution? And this is something that comes also within the main role that is to be played by the United Nations. And I am one of those who have taken part to negotiations for more than 8 years with 3 envoys, special envoys. And the result in Yemen with the envoys is the same result that the envoys of Syria and Libya are having. Don't you think that this phenomenon of failure regarding the policies of the 3 UN envoys, don't you think that we need to have a change in policy at the UN regarding this issue? And second, as it is the case in Syria, we have lots of states that are trying to see how can they contribute to find a solution to the conflict there in Syria. And these states are passing from mediators into stakeholders and taking part to the conflict. So how can we deal with these parties, and how can we manage it? So we see that the United States, Turkey, so the United States and Turkey in Syria are working on anti-terrorism there. The same applies to the Syrian regime because they say that they are fighting terrorism. So if the main objective is to fight terrorism, why don't you have common efforts and why don't you coordinate with the Syrian government? Thank you.
Meena Singh Roy from India.
Thank you, Chair. My question is directed to Ambassador Lee and one question to Minister Onal. Ambassador Lee, we know very well this region, from me, who's been watching West Asia from sitting in India, has been the region not only of strategic surprises, but also for strategic mistakes, and not to say the opening of many strategic opportunities for the Asian, continent. Particularly when we look at India, Japan, Korea, and the other Asian partners, we do see that there is, dependence on the region when we're talking about the energy resources. Now, my question to you is, bilaterally, each country has been working towards establishing certain, framework and relationship. But collectively, what do you think in the present context the Asian countries can work towards, managing conflict and working towards stabilization? That is my question to you. My second question is to Minister Onal, is basically, the new regional order that we see unfolding in the West Asian region. There are realignments that you do see. There are new equations which are developing. In that context, what in your view is Turkey's new role that you see in the region? Given the changes in its foreign policy, particularly its growing contacts with Russia and Iran, and also being a NATO partner and looking at Eurasia, also if we look at it, you're trying to build
Thank you very
new
much.
equations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask one more person to ask a question, but I want to give sufficient advance warning to the panelists as to what I will do immediately after that. We will only have 9 minutes strictly to deal. That's not the right clock. This is the right clock. 9 minutes to deal with the questions when we come to them. So I would ask each of you to spend 3 minutes on it and be mindful of the fact that you can't take time from the others. So I will ask Minister Lee, Anand, and then Onal to speak in that order. You now have time to collect your thoughts. You don't have to answer absolutely every single question because that might take us well into the evening, but give your responses to the key points that have been raised and especially the ones directed to you. And so with that, Dana Allen.
Thank you, John. My questions to the Turkish and German ministers. John Chipman already noted your cordial but pretty clear depictions of your differences over the operation in northeastern Syria. Along with President Trump's decision that precipitated that operation, these were, of course, the context of President Macron's recent controversial comments on NATO. And my question to both of you is this: do treaty allies like Turkey and Germany really retain enough common interests to resuscitate NATO's brain?
Thank you very much. So it's good that the State Minister and the Foreign Minister have 3 minutes to think about that answer. Do go ahead. Point of view of China.
3 minutes. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attention. I am really lucky because I was an ambassador to the KSA, and I see that we have lots of questions coming from the KSA to me. So first of all, regarding the BRI, so this initiative is not only something that is unilateral to China. This is an initiative in order to strengthen the economic growth at the international level. It's a kind of, international symphony. Consequently, the main principles of this initiative is to have consultation. So this means that if the world changes, consequently, this impacts everybody. This is why we need to discuss all the important points. And also, we need to share. This means that every person who wants, or every entity that wants to participate, it can participate through its own dimensions and perspective and sharing. So sharing, this means that each of the stakeholders will also have their own dividends out of this initiative. Consequently, it is not an issue of bilateralism or a couple. This is something that encompasses both, bilateralism and pluralism and multilateralism. Consequently, we have, for example, many countries in the world that are taking part to the funds, to the wealth funds, sovereign wealth funds in China, and we have 160 states and organizations that have signed agreements with China in order to build the BRI. Consequently, we can say that we have trust because we consider that this initiative will be very useful for the economic growth and will be helping in development, namely regarding the concerned states and the developing states. Now, regarding the relationships between China and KSA. In China, we are very keen on having a very good relationship and good cooperation with KSA, and there is a lot of partnership and a very high level of relations. So we have a global or a comprehensive strategic relationship. This is something that exists in an official document amongst both our states. This is why we are very ready to develop and to strengthen the collaboration and the cooperation at all and different levels in order to deepen the trust, to deepen the cooperation and collaboration at the bilateral level or at the international level. We really respect the KSA population, and we are keen on having good relations with this friend country. Now, regarding the rebuilding of Yemen and Syria, we are very ready to take part in the rebuilding and the reconstruction with all the stakeholders when we will have the conducive environment, and consequently we can say that China have started with some works. I am the CEO of an Chinese Arab study center, and our center has had 4 exploring tours and missions with Syrians in order to work on reconstruction. This is to push forward all the positive efforts for reconstruction there. Of course, we hope that we will have the conducive environment for that. This is why we are ready to collaborate with everybody regarding this issue. The same applies to Yemen. If we have the conducive environment, we are ready to do so. Now, regarding the issue of Iran, as you know, the position of China is very clear, which is to have the commitment of all stakeholders to their commitments, their obligations, duties, and rights in order to guarantee stability, security in the region. I think that it is very important to reduce the accusations and to reduce the negatives and to increase the positives. This is our main responsibility, the responsibility of everybody. Now, for the last question regarding how to manage conflicts, I think that our colleague from India asked this question. It is very important to have this balance between development and dialogue, because dialogue is the best way to solve problems and resolve conflicts, because without this, problems will be long-lasting. This is why the first choice needs to be given to dialogue in conflict resolution and to follow development in order to overcome all the challenges and to have strategic choices and options for all developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Herr Nielsen.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. I'm trying to make most of my time picking up the question on Russia. I am concerned about some of the behaviors and strategies that we are seeing. And I want to name 2. One is, of course, Syria. We just, again, were forced to publish a European statement regarding activities in Idlib. And I'm mentioning this also in the context of our stabilization efforts. If you look at recent New York Times publications, I think there's overwhelming proof that Russian Air Force also targeted health operation centers, hospitals that were co-funded also with German taxpayers' money. And of course it had a massive political impact. I don't have the time to go into details, but also want to mention alarming reports about increased Russian engagement in Libya, including apparently mercenary forces that could be able to turn military balance, which is very, very fragile, as you know. So we need to address that. On the other hand, I think that we also should not fall into the Russian trap. They are very, very good in, painting their own forces in a way that do not also always reflect the whole aspect of power projection in the region, but it is and it must be an issue. I want to make a comment, of course, on the question of NATO, because I think what we need to do right now, especially given the challenges that we have been discussing also here in Manama, is to keep the alliance together, to do everything to strengthen the alliance. But this will not work by, not talking about differences that we may have and shortcomings that may exist. So language is important in politics, and NATO is not only a military alliance, it is also a political alliance. And that's what Heiko Maas's initiative is aiming at, strengthening the cohesion, but also, if you will, the debating culture within the military and the political alliance NATO. And therefore we need input, we need a space to have that open discussion. But I don't think that we can afford the luxury, to have a reflection pause or something like this. We need to work on this now. And in the aim of our initiative, I don't see any contradiction to what our French friends are doing, and we have been working, as always, also very closely with our allies. And the peace dividend, if I have that 30-second, look, I don't see a contradiction there with our military engagement. We have a toolbox, and we are using also military means if necessary. And if you look at the example of Afghanistan, we have been doing both. We are in Afghanistan in a very difficult environment, together with our allies and friends, while at the same time using the other part of the toolbox and offering our good offices to facilitate talks with the Taliban, to facilitate an inter-Afghan dialogue. And that's why we are investing in both. We are strengthening our mediation unit in the Foreign Office. We are strengthening our ability to provide humanitarian assistance and stabilization efforts, as I try to outline. But at the same time, Germany, believe it or not, but that is the truth, is investing massively in its military, and that isn't any contradiction from my point of view.
Thank you very much. 3 minutes, Minister Onan. 2.5.
Thank you. For Russian engagement in the region, well, I think we have to recognize that Russia is an actor in this region that we have to reckon with. Especially in the case of Syria, when the US disinclined to enforce the red lines that they set, after that point on, we should recognize that Russia has become a very important actor with their intervention. And for all kinds of purposes, it would be good to get engaged with Russia. This is what we are trying to do, and it has created positive results. We believe that they are also committed for a viable political solution in Syria. As to our bilateral relationship, again, Russia is a very important partner for us on many areas, you know, from tourism to energy, transportation, etc. Russia ranks among the first in our bilateral relationship. There were 2 questions about NATO, whether we need, as Turkey, NATO more or NATO needs us more. You know, the answer is in the motto of NATO, all for one, one for all. We stick to this understanding. And as to resuscitate the brain of NATO, you know, we should not take things out of their context. As for hundreds and other issues, Turkish operation in Syria, these are issues that we can discuss within NATO, and we are trying to do so. NATO is most successful defense organization of all time, and I think it is going to remain as such. We are committed to support this idea. Why not work with Syrian regime to combat terrorism? You know, in Astana context, we have indirect correspondence with the Syrian regime, but we have so many divergences. First, the Syrian regime, to be accepted as an interlocutor, they should comply with the roadmap of a political solution as described in UN Resolution 2254. And to the extent they are engaged, there will be greater room to be accepted in the international community. Turkey's role in whether there is going to be a realignment or so, you know, Turkey is, because of its geography, is not just part of NATO, the West, the Middle East, the Caucasia, or Asia. It's all at the same time. And our potential ability to bring about additional value to efforts for regional peace, security, prosperity would be maximized if we can continue to have all these identities at the same time. We cannot lose one identity for the benefit of the other. We are one at the same time, but we also recognize the increasing importance of Asia and the shift towards Asia, and we are trying to put our act together in our foreign policy as well. We have announced a new policy called Asia Anew, with which we are going to try to look at this region. Of course, this is not a unified region. It has a lot of sub-regions for which you have to design your own policies, but we are trying to integrate our own policy towards it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Onal. Thank you, all three of you. We will break now for coffee. Please come back in 20 minutes so that we can get the U.S. point of view. A lot of talk about the United States in the last 5 hours, but we have three Americans who will address that subject now. But for the moment, please thank very warmly Sedat Onal, Neil Zanin, and Lee Chung-won.